Hello all, welcome to Samvaad-Talks. I'm Shalini Singh, a student volunteer with IIITB Branding Committee, and I'll be introducing the speaker and the talk of the day. The topic of the talk is Online TSP on a Circle, which will be delivered by Professor V.N. Muralidhara, IIIT Bangalore. Dr. Muralidhara V.N. is an associate professor at IIIT Bangalore. Dr. Muralidhara V.N. has done PhD in CAC at IIT Delhi. His thesis was done in the area of algorithms. He has done MTech in computer application at IIT Delhi and MSc in mathematics at University of Hyderabad. He is interested in the theory of algorithms and complexity and their applications. More especially, his broad area of research interest include combinatorial optimization, approximation algorithms, and randomized algorithms, and on online algorithms. Today, Professor Muralidhara is presenting his joint work with Vinay Jagwal, an MS student, and P.S. Srinivasan, an IIM Tech student, on online TSP on a circle. In the online version of TSP request to the server, salesman may be presented in an online manner. That is, while the server is moving, this talk discusses a special case in which requests are located only on the circumference of a circle and server moves only along the circumference of that circle. They name this problem as online TSP on a circle, OLTSP-C. As always, we thank our audience in Zoom meeting as well as on the YouTube live stream for supporting Samvad Talks. Please feel free to ask questions for Professor Muralidhara on the chat as the talk progresses. We'll take the questions at the end of the talk. Now I request Professor Muralidhara to start the talk. Thank you.
Today's talk is on online TSP and a circle. This is a joint work with Vinay, who is my MS student, and PS Srinivasan, who was our IM Tech student. And the main results of this paper are published in the IMC. So those who are interested, if wants to look at the details of the talk, and go back and look at this paper. Let's just get started with the well-known TSP problem, which is known as the traveling salesman problem. So in this problem, you are given a origin and a set of points. The goal is to find a tour that starts at the origin and also ends at the same place, and minimizes the total distance traveled. Right, so this is also known as Chinese Postman problem. It's probably easy to understand with two different examples. You have a postman who collects the uh, letters in the post office. Now his job is to deliver these letters to people who have received the letter. So he wants to do it in minimum time, right? So, or the total distance traveled. So the modern example could be, you can think of a salesman as the person who delivers the Amazon or the Flipkart packets. He goes to the delivery office where he picks all the packets, and on a given day he has to deliver certain packets. Addresses are given, so you have to visit these locations and deliver this and finish his job, right? So the objective is to figure out what is the order in which these packets have
Sorry,
to be
Murali.
delivered. So the objective in the case of that delivery person is to deliver in minimum time and finish his job. So this is a well-known problem that has a history of more than 50 years. But there has been very recent, last 2 3 years, there are interesting results. There are several versions of the problem still unsolved and many questions to be answered. So I will share some of the recent last 2 years developments, which are kind of breakthroughs in this area. I'll mention some of the results here. To begin with, what is already known long back is that this problem is known to be an NP-hard problem. So no efficient algorithm is known to solve this problem, and it's also hard to approximate on a general graph. So that means that no non-trivial approximation algorithms are known in a general graph. But on a special graphs like Euclidean space, a p-dash was known. And so p-dash essentially means that you can get a solution which is very close to the optimum solution in near polynomial time. And on a metric space, a 3 by 2 approximation algorithm was known about 45 years back. And so the lower bound for metric TSP, so this is on a undirected graph. So the lower bound is very close to 1, but the best approximation algorithm, which is known as 3 by 2. So people try to break this 3 by 2 for last 45 years, and so no better algorithm than 3 by 2 was known. But very recently, in July 2020, so the following authors have come up with an algorithm which is slightly better than 3 by 2. It's something like 3 by 2 minus 1 by 10 to the power 32. Right, so it is still better than 3 by 2, right? So breaking this 3 by 2 approximation factor was a challenging problem for last 45 years. So this has been broken, so we are able to do slightly better than 3 by 2. But still, the best known low bound is close to 1. So there's a large gap to be filled. And there is also a case of undirected graph, which is known as the asymmetric TSP. No constant fraction approximation algorithm was known till recently. So the following authors, again published in the Journal of ACM in 2020, have come up with a constant fraction approximation algorithm for the asymmetric traveling salesman problem. So even though these problems were studied for a long time, some major breakthroughs have been happening in the um, last 2 years. So I'll also mention some more specific to the online TSP towards the end of the talk. But for time being, let me focus on the online version of the TSP. So in the online version of the TSP, requests are given over a period of time. So this is in contrast to the offline case. In the case of offline, so the points where you have to pick up the orders or the delivery points are all known before the algorithm starts. But in the case of online, this is not given. These points where you have to visit or deliver, these points are given over a period of time. So the algorithm has to adjust to this online scenario. A good example could be the dial rate problem, which is a generalization of a TSP problem. In the dial rate problem, there is a source and destination. You have to pick up somebody at the source and deliver at the destination at a given time, right? So a good example could be our cab service, right? So Ola or other service providers, right? So where the request can come anytime. So at 3 o'clock, I need to be picked at Electronic City and probably dropped at their destination, which is the airport, right? So that's a kind of request where the requests are not known well in advance. So the algorithm has to adjust to the the requests that are going to come over a period of time. The TSP is a special case of the dial-ride problem because the source itself is the destination. If you just go there and deliver the packet there, that's enough, right? So the deliver point is same as the destination point. So TSP is a special case of the dial-ride problem. So in the case of an online algorithm, when we design an algorithm, so what we consider is what is known as the competitive ratio. The competitive ratio is the ratio between the objective function value produced by the online algorithm. We have a online algorithm which gives you some answer. You can compute the objective function, which could be the total distance traveled or the last service that has been done, right? So that is the last delivery time. This is the performance of the online algorithm is compared with the value, best known value, that the optimum value that is produced by an optimum online algorithm. So the performance of the online algorithm is always compared with the performance of an optimum offline algorithm. I would like to emphasize here that the optimum offline algorithm will know everything about the instance, all the points where the requests have to be done well in advance, right? So the way it happens in real life is that you have this algorithm running throughout the day. So you online algorithm has to adopt and give the solution as and when the request comes. But at the end of the day, you know what are all the requests that has come on a particular day. You know how the online algorithm has performed. Whether it is good or bad is compared with an optimum online. So at the end of the day, you know all the inputs for the algorithm. So at the end of the day, when all the requests have come, it becomes an optimum offline case. So you compute the optimum case and compare it with the performance of the online algorithm. So this is a metric that is used to uh, classify or measure the performance of an online algorithm. So in the case of TSP, there are two versions that we're going to consider. One is called as the Hamming case, and the other one is called nomadic. So they are also called closed TSP and the open TSP. In the closed TSP, the salesman need to return to the origin. So you always start at a location, you serve all the requests and come back to the place where you started. So that is called as a closed TSP. In the open TSP, you start at the origin, but the time when you finish the last one, you don't have to come back to the origin, right? So when you visit all the request points, you're done, right? So in today's talk, the objective function that we are trying to minimize is the time when the last request is served. So there are several requests which are coming, and you have to serve all the requests. So the objective function that we are trying to minimize is the last request that you serve, right? So in the closed case, after you serve the last request, so there is an additional constraint that you have to come back to the original place, which is a origin place is where the algorithm starts in the beginning. At time zero, the server or the salesman is at a fixed location, which is called as the origin. And after you serve all the requests, you can have to come back to the same location. So these two are important classifications. The second one, having a condition to come back to the origin might seem to be very small constraint, but what happens during the towards the talk, we'll see that the bounds that we can apply for these two variants are totally different, and the techniques that are used in designing algorithms for these two online algorithms for these two cases are also different. So the lower bounds are different, and the algorithmic techniques are also different for these two cases. So in this talk, I'll also consider what is known as a ZLAS algorithm. Online algorithm is said to be a ZLAS algorithm if the server that is used by the online algorithm does not wait when there are unserved requests. So when there is some request to be served, you can always stop at a point and wait for more requests to come and then start continue with your algorithm. In the case of zealous algorithms, that's not allowed, right? So as long as there is some work that need to be done, the server need not be waiting ideal. So one way to get away with this wait condition is just to go front and back, right? So you're at a location, you go 1 kilometer and again come back, right? So which is equivalent to waiting. So the in the case of the circle, so what really happens is that the request will only come in the circumference of the circle. So your server has the salesman or the server. I'll be using these two um, alternatively. Has to the movement has to be either clockwise or anti-clockwise, right? So you in order to ensure that it's a zealous algorithm in true sense, you have to continue to travel in the same direction. If you are traveling in the clockwise direction, you need to continue in the clockwise direction until you serve a request or a new request comes. Once you serve a request, then you have an option to change your direction. or you are also allowed to change a request because some new request has come which is just before the place where you are. These are the only two conditions when the ZLAS algorithm is allowed to change the direction. Otherwise, you have to move in the same speed. So all the algorithms that we are expecting is that all the algorithm will, all the servers will move in the unit speed. You're not allowed to slow down the speed at uh, any of these conditions. So that's what is a ZLAS algorithm. So in this talk, our main focus will be on ZLAS algorithm for the online TSP, but we will only consider the metric as the circle. So in the circle, you have a circle. So it's like just like a ring road. You're allowed to travel only on the ring road. All the requests that happens on the circumference of the circle. So the main results that we are going to talk today is that in the case of nomadic, that's the closed DSP, we will have a 28 by 13 competitive ratio is the lower bound. And for the homing case where it's a closed version, the lower bound is 7 by 4. So lower bound in the sense that you can't have an algorithm which is better than 28 by 13. And I will also talk about two ZLAS algorithms. So one is for the closed case, which is 2.5, and the other one is the two competitive algorithm. Right. So this is what is the plan. Let's look at a simple proof of lower bound. I'll start with the homing one, so that it's also easy to remember it as a um, closed one. So where the server has to come back to the origin, right? So we have this O is my origin. So you can place the origin as anywhere that you want because of symmetry, you can start anywhere. But I'll fix the point as O, which is the starting position. And for this example, I will assume that the circumference of this circle is 4 units. So the B that I have is diagonally opposite to the origin, right? So if you want to travel from, if you start on the clockwise direction, if you reach the diagonally opposite, you need 2 units of time to reach from O to B. So the midpoint of that is A, right? So if you start with O, if you want to reach A, then the amount of time that you need is 1. And the diagonally opposite of A is C, right? So if you start at C, if you want to go to O or P, it takes 1 unit at 5. Similarly, I have D, which is the midpoint of the arc between A and O. So whereas um, this is the midpoint. So if you want to go from A to D, it takes half a unit of time. So this is the setting that I have. So what I'm going to do now is that we will show that I'll produce a sequence of requests for which any online algorithm would lose a factor of 7 by 4, right? So when we have to start with the online algorithm, so what happens is that when you start at the origin, the online algorithm has two options: either to move in the clockwise direction or anti-clockwise direction. Without lot of generality, I'm going to assume that online algorithm, when it has a choice to go with clockwise and anti-clockwise because of symmetry, we will assume that it always takes the clockwise, right? So if it really takes anti-clockwise, then I have to flip all the inputs accordingly. So these are the inputs that I have. So initially, at time 0, there is a request. So what I have on the left hand side is the time, and what I have is on the right hand side is the location where there is a request. Okay. So initially, both the online and offline servers are at the origin. Now at time 0, there is a request at D, right? So there is a request at D. So the notation here is that the first one is the time when the request has come. Second one is the location where there is a request, right? So the first request is at time 0, which is at D. Since there is only one request, the online algorithm will move towards this, serve this and come back, right? So Since it's a homing case, so we will assume that after it serves this request D, it'll come back to the origin. If it doesn't come back to the origin, if it continues to move in the clockwise direction, then we can create another set of inputs where the algorithm will actually do very bad. Okay. Since it's a home, so in that case, we will not release more requests and algorithm will do badly. So we will assume that after serving the first request, it will come back to the origin. So it takes half a unit of time to reach the D and half a units of time to come back. So it cannot wait anywhere. So at time one, it has to be at the origin, right? So that's where no waiting is allowed. It cannot wait at D. Um, Now at time one, two requests are released, one at A and one at C, right? So both are at equidistance from O. The online algorithm has the option to serve C or A at time one. So as I said, we'll assume that it will go to clockwise and finish the A1, and then it'll come back to the origin and then try to serve the C. After serving A, it can either come to B or it can go to O to in order to serve C, right? So both are same. But in this case, we will assume that it will go back to O. If it goes to B, same algorithm, same analysis argument will hold. So at 1, it is at O, and at 1, there is a request to be released at K. So it will go from O to A. At time 2, it will serve the request A, and it will go back to O at time 3, right? So when it is at time 3, then since it has already served a request at A, so the adversary will release one more request at A now. So at time 3, it has two requests. One is at C and one is at K. So even it doesn't matter where the online algorithm is, whether it is O or B. It's one of these locations, but it cannot wait at A. Because it's a ZLAS algorithm and there is a request at C, it has to make an effort to serve one of them. So either it has to go in the clockwise direction or anti-clockwise direction. So it will be either at O or B. So, but at time t, it has two unserved requests. One is at A and one is at B, C. So it has to, so if it is at the origin, then it has to go here and come back. Reaching C will take 1 unit of time and coming back will take one more unit of time. And after that, if it has to serve A, then so what happens is that it has to go to A and come back. So at time 3, it has to go to the left as well as go to the right. Going to the left take 2 units of time. Go to the right also takes 2 units of time. So at time 3, it has to minimum do 4 units of work in order to complete all the requests. So the time when it finishes all the requests and comes back to the origin. So at 3, it goes to scenes and come back at 5, and it reaches A at 6 and then come back to O at 7. So at 7, it finishes everything. But if this is the set of requests that are given to you, let's see what is the best that we can do in the case of offline. So in the case of offline, you know that these are the 4 requests that I have to serve, right? So what I do is that I don't care about the when the time 0 when D is released, I don't do anything to it because I know that at time once there is a request which is going to be released at C. So what I do is that instead of going to the right, the offline algorithm at time 0 goes to C. At time 1, there is a request released at C. It serves the request. Then it comes back to O and it's at the origin at time 2. And then it goes to 3. When it goes to A, then you can also finish the first request, which is at D. And when it reaches A at 3, there are one was already released at A, and at time 3, there is one more request that's going to be released at 3. It can serve all of them at time 3. And then it will come back to the origin at time 4. So the offline algorithm takes, by time 4, it finishes everything. And at time 4, it finishes serving all the requests and it's back to the origin. But we have seen that the best thing that an online algorithm can do, it can finish only at time 7. So the competitive ratio that we are looking at is the performance of the online algorithm, which is 7, and the corresponding optimum value for the offline algorithm is 4. Right, so the lower bound for an online algorithm to serve the closed OLTSP is at least 7 by 4. So any online algorithm will lose a factor of 7 by 4. So now we'll move to the next example. The next example is also very similar to this. In that case, after serving the last request, the uh, the server need not go back to the origin. It can stop wherever it is. So that's the time that we are going to count. So the example is very similar to this, but it's slightly more complicated. Let me just go through it. Let me just, in this example, I'll assume that, so I want all the numbers to be integers. So I'll assume that the circumference of the circle is 8 units. So as I said earlier, so there's a O, this is where everything starts. The diagonally opposite entry is B. The midpoint is A. So if you want to go from O to A, it takes 2 units of time. Diagonally opposite to A is C, and D is in between O and A, right? So it takes 1 unit time to reach D. And there is, yeah, so similarly, E is midpoint of O and C, and G is midpoint of O and E, and F is the midpoint of O and D. So there is a symmetry all over the place. There are two more points. I'll come back to that when I describe the input. Okay. So I want to ensure that the online algorithm makes a move. So the first input is actually a kind of dummy input. So the first input is released at uh, so the first input is released at time 0, and it's at the F, right? So since there is a request, the online algorithm has to start moving. It'll go to F. It'll reach F at time off, and it'll serve the request. Where after it reaches F, I'll again release one more request at the origin. So that is at point 5, I will release a request at origin, so it will come back. Okay. So now I will do exactly similar to what I had done earlier. So I will release two requests at time 1. One is at D and the other one is at E, right? So since both are symmetric, I can either decide to serve one of them. So we will assume that the online one goes to the in the clockwise direction, and at time 2 it reaches D and serves this request D. At time 2, after it finishes serving the request D, there is nothing else, so it has to make effort to serve the request E. So it will start moving towards the origin because that is the shortest way to reach E, right? If it tries to go in the clockwise direction further, then the algorithm is anyway too bad. So at time 3, it will again reach O, right? So it has one unserved request at E that needs to be served, but at time 2, it is at origin. So at time 3, we are at origin. It has one request to be served, which is at E. So now what happens is that we will release one more request at D, right? So there's already one request to be served at E. So one more request that needs to be served at D. So both are symmetric. Either it can go to the left or right. So let's assume that it comes to D and serves it, right? So it has wasted one movement from O to D because it's gone two times, right? So it was enough to just to wait and then do it in one go. So at time 4, it has served the request D. There is still one more request at E which is to serve. So it will start again moving in the backward direction, right? So this is what happens at the time 4. So now there are whatever requests that have been released. Let's see what is the best that can be done by an offline algorithm. So what offline algorithm can do is that there are several requests that are going to be released on the right hand side. So, but there is why we release only one request on the left hand side. So what is good is to, since we know this information in the case of an offline algorithm, so what we do is that I go to the left first, go to E, in 1 unit of time I can reach E. When I reach E, at time 1, there is a request which is released at 3. So I serve the request and then come back to origin at 2. Then at 3, I will come to D, right? So When I come to D, I can visit F. I can also visit D, right? So there are two requests to be served at D. Both of them can be served at time 3. One was released at time 1 and the other one was released at time 3. So and there was also F, there was a request which is released. I have served all of them, right? So at 3, I have served everything that was released. So I still have some time. So what I'll do is that I'll move to A. At time 4, the offline algorithm is at A, the distance A, and the online algorithm is still at D. And our online algorithm, it's not clear why it has come to A, right? So there was no reason why the online algorithm had to come to A, because intuitively I'm going to release something which is further, right? So towards after A. Right, so but the online algorithm is stuck with this. It's at D. It has to serve one more at E, so it'll start going in this backward direction. From A, the online algorithm will go forward in the clockwise direction. We will stop at a time, right? So where so we want to look at a so this X is a place so that if you just look at the distance of the from the arc E to D, right? So there is an X that I have written. This is a point, and this distance I will also call it as small x. So this distance is also going to be x, right? So at time 4, the online is at 4, and the offline is at a. So this will move in the clockwise direction, and this is forced to move in the anti-clockwise direction. So this x is such that so when you go from this location to this location, this location is actually exactly in between, right? So the length of the arc e to x is exactly half of the length of the arc from e to, so we'll also call it as x dash here. So this x is the distance. So this point is x distance away from A in the clockwise direction. Here, this will be a location which is in the anti-clockwise direction, x distance away from D. So this is the point where we are going to release one more request. So this has to be served at this point of time. We are going to serve this request, release the request. So the advantage for the online algorithm is that it can immediately finish this request. As and when it's released, it can be served. So we are trying to keep the online algorithm away from the request that I'm going to serve. So once that happens, then this online algorithm has to serve both E and X. So it has to go from here to here and then come back and serve this. So this will take 3 into X amount of time, right? So that's precisely the what we are going to do. So now we want to find this X, how much distance we had to travel so that the length of this arc is half of length of the bigger arc, right? So bigger arc essentially means that from E to the A here. So this point should be midpoint of the arc starting at A and all the way till here. So that point is easy to compute because so if we just look at so what the total distance traveled by the online algorithm at time one it is at E. From E, it'll take 1 unit of time to reach O. So the distance traveled here is 1. From here to A, the distance traveled is 2, right? So that's what I have written here. And after 2, it travels the distance of x. So the distance traveled by the online algorithm, which is the length of the arc from E to x, which is 1 plus 2 plus x. So now we want to look at twice of this distance. So this is obviously from here to here, the distance is 1. And this distance up to D is 1, but this length of this is x, right? So the length of O to this point is 1 minus x. So the 1 plus x, 1 plus 2 plus x should be equal to 2 into 1 plus 1 minus x. So if you solve this, so you see that x is 1/3, right? So when you move away from 1/3, so what you really see is that that's where the length of this arc is going to be half of length of the bigger arc. So as I mentioned earlier, the online algorithm at 4 it is at a 4 plus one third it will be x at x. So if I release a request at 4 which is at x, it can complete that request at 4 plus 1 by 3, which happens to be 13 by 3. But the online algorithm at this point of time, that is 13.3, it will be at this location. After that, it has two requests to be served, right? So that so one is at A, one is at X. So the total distance that needs to be served is that it doesn't matter whether it tries to serve X. Even if it try to X first, then it has to go back and then come and serve the request at E. So the total distance it has to serve is the total distance that it has to serve is 3 into 1 plus 1 minus x, right? So that's precisely so this distance, right? So 1 plus 1 minus x is the length of the shorter arc. It has to serve this, come back, that makes it 2, and again come to this and serve this, that makes it 3 into the length of the smaller arc, which is 1 plus 1, 1 minus x, right? So if you plug in x is equal to 1/3, so what you get here is that this is 28 by 3. So the online algorithm will finish everything in 28 by 3, but the offline algorithm will finish everything by 13 by 3 time. So the competitive ratio is 28 by 3, which is strictly greater than 2. So here, so we are forcing the online algorithm to move back and forth in one direction, whereas the offline algorithm will finish something on the other side, right? So that after it finishes here, for no reason it moved to A, and so let's move to A because it knew that I'm going to release something here which can be served. But the online algorithm did not know this, right? So it went unnecessarily 2 times here to serve the request at F and D and wasted a lot of time. So the way the adversary released the request enforced the online algorithm to make some wasteful moves, which is totally unavoidable. So that's why in the case of online algorithm, so the competitive ratio that we lose is 28 by 13. The important thing to note is that the assumption that here is that the online algorithm is zealous. In other words, so the algorithm cannot wait, right? So if it was allowed to wait, probably it would have waited a day for another request to come, and then the story would have been different. So it has to go back to the origin, so to serve the other request which was unserved. So that is what is forcing this algorithm to increase the competitive ratio. So I will just mention the algorithm that we have. This is for the online TSP in the um, in the first case, where you don't have to go back to the origin. Uh, so here, so the policy is extreme request first, right? So here, this policy gives us 2.5 competitive ratio. Remember that the lower bound is 28 by 13, so which is slightly more than 2. But the algorithm that we have designed can achieve 2.5. So the algorithm is at any point of time t, when the new requests arrive, we first find the smallest interval that covers all the release requests, but which are unserved. Then the online server then from its current position goes to the nearest end of the one of the interval and serves that request. So if you look at diagrammatically, just look at an interval. So it goes to one of the endpoint. So obviously it'll go to the nearest endpoint. And then since all the requests are in this interval, so it'll just go to the end and cover this, right? So keep repeating this. So as and when the new requests come, you find the shortest interval where the answered requests are there and keep applying this algorithm. So what we can show is that formally is that this gives a 2.5 competitive ratio. So I will not go into the details of this proof. For those who are interested can refer to our paper, but I'll just give a small idea how the proof actually works. I'll consider a special case. Now, if the circumference, if the interval is relatively small compared to the, uh, is more precisely less than half of the circumference of the circle, Then if the online server is actually inside the um interval, right? So at this point of time, so what we are saying is that all the requests, there are some new requests which have come, but all the requests are in this interval, so it has to be a circle, right? So the interval where all the requests are there is from here to here. So it's probably easy to understand through a line, right? So this is the interval that I'm talking about. So all the requests are between this and this. So if the online server is somewhere here, then it's easy to argue that we don't lose too much. At time t, so if you look at the extreme request case, so the total time that is required to complete all the requests is t. That is the time right now which is there. I am going to go to the one of the endpoint, right? So obviously I'll go to the nearest endpoint. So the distance that is required to go to the nearest endpoint is less than half the interval. All right. So I'll go to the nearest endpoint. That's why it's less than half the interval. So once I go there, what happens is that I just go and serve all of them, reach the other endpoint. The time that is required to serve that is the length of the interval, right? So if I take this much of time, I can certainly finish all the requests that have been released now. So now we can see that all these three quantities that I have, so both the t and I that I have is smaller than optimum. T is smaller than optimum because the at time t is the when the new request, the latest request came. That's where this interval was constructed. So new request was released at time t, so the optimum can only finish after that. So the optimum has to be greater than t. And psi is the length of the intervals. Right now, whatever requests are come, they are between this and this. So the optimum, even if it is at one corner point, it has to reach the other point to serve the other request. So the optimum will always have, will take from time t at least I amount of time to reach the other endpoint, right? So by plugging in these two quantities, optimum is greater than t and optimum is also greater than the length of the interval. So what you can easily see is that it's 2.5, right? So so every time when you recompute this interval, the optimum goes to one of the endpoint and then try to solve this thing. So there are other cases which is not covered in this case. The proof is slightly involved. We have to consider case by case, but we can show that in this case it's 2.5. So the other case, homing case is we have a two competitive algorithm. So the algorithm here is even simpler. So ignore all the requests which are closer to the origin. So you know that your server has to eventually come back to the origin. So anything which is coming to the any requests which are released near the origin, you just ignore them, right? So yeah, otherwise, if there are requests which are not closer to the origin, so how do you define the closeness to the origin is a relative term. So it depends on where is the location of the server, right? So P is the location where the server is right now. X is the location where a new request is released. So O is the location. If the distance where the new request is released to the origin is smaller than the distance from the current location of the online algorithm to the origin. So in that case, we say that this is closer to the origin. In that case, you ignore the request, don't do anything. After you finish serving all the requests that you're already serving, you can come back and serve the request which is closer, right? So that's the most intuitive thing. But if there are requests which are released further, not closer to the origin, then what the algorithm does is that it goes back to the origin. Anyway, I have to go back to the origin. So once you go back to the origin, consider all the requests that have been released so far and apply the best optimum algorithm and start serving in the same order. When a new request is has to comes in, you just ask the question whether it is closer to the origin. If it is closer to the origin, ignore it. Otherwise, go back to the origin and keep computing. So you see that the two cases that we consider, the algorithms are different and the complexity ratios that we achieve are also different. And we don't have counterexamples to show that these algorithm, the analysis is tight, right? So, but um, we don't know whether these algorithms are the best ones that we can design. Just to wind up, there is also similar TSP. The online TSP has been widely studied on a relative metric, which is the TSP on a line. From the last 20 years, there have been several papers which are written on online TSP on a line. There was always a gap between the lower bound and the best known algorithms, whatever they were doing. But only in December 2020, by these authors who published their paper in the transactions of algorithms, have closed all the gaps for the online TSP on a line. For the closed online TSP on a line, so they have a lower bound of 1.64, and they also have an algorithm which achieves this bound. And for the open online TSP on a line, 2.04 is the competitive ratio. This is the low bound, and they have also an algorithm which achieves this. The ideas which are involved in proving low bound for those two cases are totally different, and the online algorithms, the techniques that are used in designing these algorithms are also different. So the in the closed one, there is only additional constraint that you have to come back to the place where you started. But algorithmically, this is a totally different problem, and the bounds that we can achieve compared to open, there's a clear difference. So as far as the line is considered for this problem, there is the gap between the lower bound and upper bound has been closed recently. As I mentioned during the talk, there is also a question of daily write problem. As I said earlier, the TSP is a special case of daily write problem. In the case of daily write problem, there is a source and there is also a destination. You have to pick up the request at the source and you have to deliver at the destination. But in the case of TSP, there is only one point. You can imagine that the source itself is the destination. So in that case, the TSP is a special case of a daily write problem. But no non-trivial results were known on any graph for the Dieler-Red problem, which was different from what was known for the TSP. So people thought that the complexity of these two are more or less same. But there's a paper which was published in 2019. The more general version of the paper is still coming up. So what they have shown is that the lower bound for the Dieler-Red on a um, dilated on a line is here we only consider the open case. The dilated on a line is 2.05, which is different from 2.04, right? So the TSP, the complexity of solving TSP is different from complexity of solving the dilated problem. This is the first result which separates the online dilated problem from the online TSP problem. So this is the lower bound, but what is known here is 2.04, and they also have an algorithm which achieves this. But in the case of a dilated problem, the best known result is 2.68. Six is there is still a large gap between the lower bound and what is the best algorithm that can achieve 2 point. The best online algorithm known can achieve 2.66. There's still a large gap to be filled, and it's interesting to see how these algorithms, the dilated problem on a circle is also an interesting thing because the bounds that we have is different from this. And as I mentioned earlier, so these papers don't consider the ZLAS case. This is any online algorithms which is allowed to wait uh, um, at some location. It's also interesting to see what is the best that a ZLAS online algorithm can do for the line on this problem. And also it's interesting to see uh, how to solve the problem, dilated problem on a circle, which is also a ZLAS, and achieve some of the bonds that that are being published in the case of a line. So the line looks very similar to the circle, but when you start working out the details, these two are not same, right? So still a lot of work to be done, both in the case of line for the dilated problem, which is the general version of the TSP problem, right? So the summary is that TSP is a well-known problem. It's been studied for several decades. But still, as I mentioned here, last 2 3 years, there are some major breakthroughs that are happening. There are more works to be done. This is an exciting problem to still work on. I'll stop here. I'll be happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Murali. Great talk. Applause from us. We'll be happy to take questions. There are no questions on the chat box, so feel free to unmute and ask.
Professor Murli, that was a very interesting talk. So what do you think would be the interesting variants that we could consider for solving? This is Vivek here.
So one is the ZLAS thing. So your algorithm is not allowed to wait. So in that case, what happens to this line case, right? So will these bounds will remain, or so these algorithms, these lower bounds don't assume zealousness. Similarly, for the even for the dial-a-ride problem, that is the general version, still it's not clear, and there is a gap to be filled. And it's also interesting to see how these results generalize to circle. And you can also look at other metrics like tree and other special graphs, what kind of results can be obtained. So people thought that line is a simple graph, right? So people also have considered half a line, but these results are for real line. So once it's solved for so at least this one, it was open for a long time. Now this is closed for line, so you can construct think of other general graph, slightly more complicated than line, and see how what can be done. So line is probably too simplistic, right? So there are very few realistic real life applications where we can assume that the graph is a line. So will that answer?
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe how about maybe there's something like a three-dimensional variant? You think that would be interesting?
Three-dimensional dial-a-ride is a three-dimensional, right? Online dial-a-ride is three-dimensional. There is a source, there is a destination, there is a time.
Okay. Oh, fine. Okay.
Just one curiosity. Yeah. See, if the number of nodes are large, will it matter? I mean, normally the solutions must be uh, easy to get, or rather fast to get, or it's more difficult.
Yeah, so here when I say an online algorithm, the online algorithm should work in polynomial time.
Okay.
So we are only worried about polynomial time. So when you come up with 1.64 competitive ratio, as long as the algorithm under consideration is polynomial time, people are happy, right? So people don't try to reduce that factor. So as long as it's online, it's fine. As long as it's polynomial time, it's fine.
Thank you.
So in real life, these algorithms may not be scalable because, as I say, it's polynomial. It is n cube or n to the power 10. Then it really matters.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
but
you.
the algorithm that I mentioned are very simple, right? So these are more or less very close to linear time algorithms. But you lose out on the competitive ratio because instead of 2.04, I have 2.5.
So, Murali, is there any desirable values for this competitive ratio? How would you interpret that?
The desirable value is 1, right? If it's 1, that means that it's optimum.
Okay.
So what these results are saying is that you can't come up with anything better than 1.64. That's
As of
because
now.
of no. So these results are tight. So the lower bound means that any online algorithm would require 1.64.
Okay.
And they also have a algorithm which achieves that bound.
Okay.
Right. So these are all tight now. Right.
Okay. So
But
these are
whereas
tight now.
the metric TSP that I mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the well-known algorithm, which is 45-year-old, it's 3 by 2, 1.5.
Okay.
People were not able to improve on that, right? Only recently there is an epsilon improvement,
Okay.
but the lower bound is very close to 1. So people say that you can do up to some that number is very close to 1. So there is a large gap between the lower bound and what is achievable.
Okay. Okay. So,
So in other words, if you unless p is equal to np, you cannot come up with an algorithm which achieves more than less than 1.64. That's the interpretation.
that is interpreted. Okay. So is this dimension dependent? Like what Vivek was asking, will it be different between 2D and 3D?
No, this is so as of now, this is a line, right? This is a one-dimensional problem now.
Mm-hmm. So will it get worse if the number of dimensions increase?
Yeah, then it becomes an Euclidean space, and problems are, yeah, it becomes difficult. Yeah.
So we don't have any further questions. We'd like to thank Murli once more for the nice talk. Thank you, Murli.
Thank you.